Hello, friends, and welcome back to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood. This is the last episode of our season about holy friendships, and we're ending with a rabbi and a pastor. I know, sounds like a joke, but instead, it's this beautiful and powerful friendship that shows us what it means to come together across divides. Elan Babchuck is a roughly mid-career rabbi from the East Coast, and Kathi McShane is a retired ordained pastor from the West Coast. They have only ever been together in person a few times. And yet this is a friendship that runs deep and is rooted in mutuality, mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual love. Elan and Kathi have recently written a book together that comes out in January called Picking Up the Pieces, Leadership After Empire, about moving away from the pyramid model of leadership where power is centered around one person or a group of people, and towards a shared power where every person can stretch toward the fullness of their God-given gifts, regardless of where they land on an organizational chart. Elan and Kathi embody this notion of distributed power through their friendship, which brings me to one key takeaway about holy friendships. Holy friends are a blessing, not just to the people in the friendship, but also holy friendships ultimately bless the whole world. Before we listen, a final poem for our friendship series. It's called Red Brocade by Naomi Shihab Nye. In these few words, she draws us into a moment with tastes and textures that invite us to bridge divides and take time for holy friendships. May it be so, dear friends. Hear her words. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's come from, where he's headed. That way, he'll have strength enough to answer. Or by then, you'll be such good friends you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice? Pine nuts? Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor everyone put on to pretend they had a purpose in this world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. Beautiful. Now let's listen to my conversation with Elan and Kathi. Welcome to Elan Babchuck and Kathi McShane. What a gift to have you both on our podcast today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks, Lisa, for having us both.
Absolutely. I'm so excited about this conversation. So one of our colleagues and friends, Matt Russell, talks about improbable friendships. And I wonder if that term resonates with the two of you. It certainly does from the outside looking in. I mean, I think about Kathi, an ordained United Methodist minister from California, Elan, a rabbi from Rhode Island, and yet here you are on our season about holy friendships, and you've just finished a book together. So I want to kind of start in this place of improbable friendship. Like, does that sound right to you? And tell us a little bit about how your friendship came to be.
Well, I'll just add to the list of improbabilities that you just mentioned.
Oh, please do.
I'm on the west coast of the United States. Elan's on the far east coast of the United States. We're not only different in religious tradition, we are different in generation. I'm a baby boomer. Elan is a millennial, although he calls himself a geriatric millennial. And this, I'll let Elan tell you the story of how we met, but we met once in person in 2018 and did not see each other in person again until we were just finishing our book in the spring of 2023. So we are a kind of a pandemic cultivated
Yeah.
friendship, meaning that we've talked and met together and loved each other across virtual backgrounds for a long time, but only have met each other in person a very few times.
Yeah, it's the start of every terrible joke. Like, the rabbi and the pastor walk into bars, but I think what's so maybe unexpected, counterintuitive, or improbable here, to quote your reference, is we are of generations that are not supposed to get along, right? Stereotypically, boomers and millennials are like four-letter, we're like
Yes.
curse words to one another. We're not supposed to get along. Where West Coasters aren't supposed to understand East Coasters. We're fast-paced and they take things slow, and and yet we have we are so much on the same page. We found ways to connect across 3,000 miles, across ideological gaps, across theological gaps, and what became so beautiful. One of the greatest compliments, and I mean this, because when you write a book, and a lot of people say things that you're not even sure they mean it, but you're going to receive it in all of its earnestness. But when somebody told me, I read the book and I actually couldn't even distinguish your voice from Kathy's voice, that was the greatest gift I could have received.
Yeah.
Because Kathy's voice, I read her sermon before I met her in person, and she wrote a sermon that changed my life. It was why I was at the gathering. It was a gathering that was facilitated by Ashoka, which is an organization that kind of created the field of social entrepreneurship. And they were having a gathering of faith leaders who were thinking a lot about social entrepreneurship, about change making in congregations, outside of congregations. And there I am sitting across from Kathi McShane, having read this sermon she wrote about change making. And it was like, you're not supposed to meet your idols. And I did. And it was 100 times better.
Oh, nice.
and really, it's been growing ever since. And I feel so deeply grateful for that comment when someone said, it's funny, I couldn't tell where your voice ended and Kathy's began. I said, thank you.
Nice.
I had a similar experience, Elan, recently, where somebody told me about a part of the book they were sure you had written. And it was actually, it was a part that I'd written. And so, yes, that really was, and it continues to be fun. Sometimes I can't tell now which parts I wrote and which parts you wrote.
It's great.
Yeah, so I love hearing this, and I love hearing the origins of just an immediate connection, a soul connection, a spirit connection. And so there's so much I want to pull on there, including I want to talk some more about the book. But before we get there, I want to pull on this thread of the different religious traditions that you all come from and are deeply committed to, and this notion of friendship. And what have you learned from your tradition about friendship? Like, what comes to mind?
I'll share briefly. There's a model of friendship. It's a deep form of friendship that involves learning together. It involves growing together. It involves growing through disagreement, and sort of seeking a higher shared truth together. So in Jewish tradition, that form for friendship is called chavruta. It comes from the root chaber, which means friend. But to have a chavruta in life, in study, in work, is one of the greatest gifts that the rabbis of the Talmudic tradition described. And they actually even there's a whole section of Talmud where they, rabbis argue all the time in Talmud. There's 5,000 arguments and only 50 of them are actually concluded, right? So only 1% of the arguments are really about the conclusion. They're all about the rest of them were codified so that we could learn how to disagree, how to be in relationship, how to be in conversation.
Nice.
Anyway, one of those arguments is about how to say goodbye at the end of a learning session, at the end of a meeting. They would sit knee to knee debating on matters that they really believed would determine the future, right, of Jewish life, of civilization, of the relationship between God and humans. And there's one blessing that they sort of go back and forth. Well, you should say this blessing. You should say this one. You should say this one. And there's one blessing that, as I looked back on it, it really was one that spoke to every time Kathi and I would get off a phone call or a Zoom call, or, we would have these working sessions where we're staring at a Google Doc together, and we would bid one another goodbye. And that it felt so much like the ways that the rabbis would bless one another upon leaving. So that model for me is that we're blessed by one another, that we are committed to pursuing a higher truth, and that really, like, love, respect, honor is the foundation of every one of those conversations that we have.
Yeah, I would say something very similar about love, respect, and honor. Elan is an easy person to love, respect, and honor. So we start with that. He's also extraordinarily generous with, I think, just by nature and temperament, with offering those things. So I have the easiest person in the world to be a friend with here in this conversation. But I also think there is something extraordinary about this relationship, and that we saw very early. I'm thinking about Anam Cara, the way that soul friend that is deep in Christian tradition, and I think of it as sort of my soul or my heart leaning toward somebody else. I have lots of people in my life and my ministry that I think of and call friend, but few people that it's just kind of bubbles out, right? That it's there all the time. I think early on in our connections with one another, and we worked together for a couple of years before we started the book. So even before we started the book, I think we'd finish a conversation and one or the other of us would send a text immediately afterwards saying, "That was so great. Thank you so much. It was just so good to be together in that work or that conversation." And then, this spring, as we were finishing the book, I went to Providence, Rhode Island, which I'd never been to before, and so that we could do a little writing retreat together. And I met Elan's family for the first time, his wife and his 3 children. And as soon as I walked in their home, I felt like, oh, I know this place, right? It reversed the usual pattern, I think, of developing friendships, which is that you gather information about a person and that's on the way to becoming friends. Ours, I think, was something different than that.
Yeah, which really speaks to something deeper that brought you together. I mean, you talked about a soul connection. I would use language of feels like the Holy Spirit. There's this something deeper that brought you together than simply you enjoy each other's company, and then you discover, like you said, you take the next step and the next step, and then you, a couple years down the road, you say, "Oh yeah, we're good friends." It sounds like it started out in this deeper place, which is one of the themes that keeps coming up for us in these, in kind of holy friendships, if you will, is it feels like there's something more at work. Can you play with that a little bit? Does that resonate?
Well, I'll just give you an example. Oh, sorry.
Please. No, please go.
An example of this. So the beginning of thinking about the book was literally, we were working on something else, and I think we'd been talking about this idea of a particular character of leadership for change making. And one day on Zoom call, I think, maybe phone call. I said to Elan, I think there might be a book in this. What do you think? And that's all I said. And he went, yes, I'm in, let's do it. It was just such, and I think we both recognize it now as such a ridiculously immediate response that launched us into this. And so just completely spontaneous, that it had to be something bigger than us at work, I think. So I agree with you, Lisa.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's, at a certain point, I think there are certain relationships that one has in one's life, where you're almost like you're looking for signs to prove the relationship. Like you're looking for signs, this is why I should be here. And
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, here's something that happened and they did this nice thing. And that must mean that this is what this thing means. And it's almost like from the moment we met, I would have to look for signs to somehow disprove that this was not a preordained connection that the two of us had, that there isn't some greater force at work, some greater spirit at work here. I think Buber would say that, the divine spark is kind of, is between, it's what exists between two folks, in an I, thou kind of relationship. And that spark has been just so life-giving. It has been so life-giving to have a friendship, a connection that is unquestionably, I'm using this word, divinely ordained, divinely inspired. And I think the other piece of it is, again, thinking through a Jewish lens, the greatest act of faith. I think there were really two. Let me put it this way. I think the two greatest acts of faith that I read about in the Old Testament, the first is Miriam packing the timbrels. Right? We don't read about her packing the timbrels. They're like,
I love
Exodus.
that.
Okay, everybody, grab your stuff. It's like you got 10 minutes, 18 minutes, hit the road, just like go. We don't even have time for the bread to rise. Just go. And they're off to the races, and they finally make it across. And next thing you know, she and all of the other women are playing with their timbrels, playing tambourine, and they're dancing and they're singing, because they knew wherever we're going, there's going to be a celebration to be had. And the other act is the Israelites saying Na'aseh v'nishma. They are agreeing to do everything God is asking them to do, and then v'nishma, and then after we agree, then we'll know what the details are really all about.
Yeah.
And I think those two acts of faith are really emblematic. They're very much have inspired the way that Kathi and I relate to each other. Kathi, that first phone call, the phone call about the book was, I don't even think Kathi finished the sentence, in which she said, hey, what do you think about writing a book? It was just like, yes, it was just Na'aseh v'nishma. I'm in 100%. And it doesn't really matter how hard the road is going to be to get there, to write this book, because I know there's going to be a celebration on the other end. I know there will be what to celebrate.
Okay, this is so good. And I want to play with the hard part of this, right? So we're in a season in our culture where there's so much division and polarization, and one of the themes that keeps coming up in this conversation about sanctifying friendship is that we need to make holy friendships across divides, political, racial, religious, all of that. And when the yes to that comes before the realities of that, once you get into the realities, in other words, we can talk about all day how important that is, but when you get into the realities of making friends across divides, one, it's hard because you associate with the people that we all kind of associate with people that tend to be like us in all kinds of ways we can name. And so finding and cultivating those friendships across divides is one thing. And so I'm curious about your thoughts about that, but also curious how you really not just find, but also develop and strengthen friendships across that are improbable, like that are across divides. And so let's play with that a little bit.
Yeah. And actually, that's a perfect question for us. I've known and had friendships with Jewish people for a very long time, but I really haven't had very many friendships with people who are as sort of faithful and about their religious tradition as Elan is, and in his practice and in his being. Right? He's so deeply and, to me, movingly immersed in his different religious tradition from mine. And so just this last spring, again, after we'd known each other for a long time, Elan went to Israel with his family. And it wasn't until it was actually while he was gone that I thought, I don't really know what Elan thinks about what politics in Israel. I've never asked him. It has never come up in our conversation. So when he came back, I said, I don't know what your politics are, but I want to ask you about how you feel about this thing that was in the news that was going on in Israel. And he told me, and we had a full conversation about his thoughts and my thoughts. But, at the point at which I even thought to ask, it didn't matter that difference.
Wow.
Right. It was, I would have heard any response Elan gave as fully worthy of my respect and appreciation because of the relationship that was there first.
Wow. So you've made me teary. That's so that sense of beautiful grace that goes before the specifics, right? That sense of there is something that binds us together that transcends how we fall on whatever the issue is or whatever the divide. And I know it's not. I know that it's not always that easy. Like, I get that. But what does it mean to come in with a yes before we even know the particulars, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this may feel like a hard shift, but I'm so curious to ask this question. It all sounds so beautiful, and I can't imagine you wrote a book without disagreeing or finding some places where you tried to tiptoe around eggshells or tried to navigate things together or speak truth. So can you speak to that? What did you learn about yourselves? What did you learn about each other in the midst of the process?
That's a great question. So I'm going to give an answer here, and I do so in complete faith that the history of the comments on all of our shared Google Docs will never become public. But who knows? It's Google. They might just decide to let things fly one day. No, in all seriousness, I think I think we came at it from a place of deep respect and curiosity. And I think what we both understood, and this is also about, coming together across divides means bringing your whole self into relationship in order to experience and listen and witness, even if it's just the partial truth of the other person's lived experiences, and then sit with that partial truth and imagine, what if that were my partial truth? What if the thing that I hold actually, if I held that a little more loosely and took this person's partial truth just a little more seriously? I think that's where I often, where my failures come in to really hear someone across divides is when I'm coming in feeling like what I believe, who I am, how I show up is fully formed. It is, you can't poke holes in this thing. It is fully formed, and this is what it is. Rather than recognizing that all of us are in formation. Everything is a journey. My ideological holdings, my theological holdings. It's like there's process theology. I'm like process humanity. Everything is in process. Everything. Now, and the world is spinning faster than it's ever spun before. And so the divides actually, the way, I'm not a physicist, but like centrifugal force, the way that the world is spinning as fast as it is means the centrifugal force is pulling us further and further and further apart. And those gaps and divides are becoming even more spacious, more scary to try to leap across. And so anytime we came to a point where, okay, I think it should go this direction or that direction, what I tried to do, and really I think what I continue to try to do, and Kathy's my teacher in addition to my chavruta here, is to hold loosely what it is that I'm bringing into it. And maybe to even ask a deeper question, which is, why am I bringing this into it? Why is it that I believe that this is the order of things? Or why is it that I believe that this is the framework we should use here? What am I, what is the truth for me that I'm bringing it into this? Even if it's just a partial truth, what's my lived experience that I'm bringing into it? So that's a very, long-winded, circuitous answer. But also, I think, very emblematic of the way that Kathy and I wrote and edited the book, which is I would go on those random tangents, and then she would put a comment in that says, hey, what if we cut out 4 of those paragraphs and you just said it the following way? And then inevitably she was right, because she was much more eloquent. And that's what we ended up with. We'd have a 500-page book otherwise.
And I'll just add 2 tiny stories to illustrate really what Elan just said. One was when we first saw the book in the form it was going to be published, and it had, so at the top of every left-hand page are our names, the author's names, and my name was first. And it didn't have to be that way. So we had a conversation with the editor about this. And in that conversation, Elan said, I don't know, maybe you just said this to me. In my work, the woman's name always goes first, right? That's just the commitment that I have made to resisting the powers of patriarchy in our culture. And actually, that was hard for me to receive, right? It's so Elan like generous, and it was hard for me to just take that as a gift. I feel like I wanted to deserve that first place if I was going to get it, and I didn't. And so that's one moment that I think I learned something from Elan's stance in the world. I learned something about myself and about a way of being in the world. And I think that shifted something significant for me, that conversation. The other moment, and this is a reference to what Elan was just talking about, was one of the first moments when we started editing each other's first drafts. And honestly, there was a weekend that we had, I think it was maybe our only real rub in the process, where I edited something that Elan wrote. And we're both writers by work and nature. And like, how often do you have somebody else editing your writing? It just doesn't happen very often. And he came back and said, really? Why did you? He said, really? And because of that honor and respect and affection that we have for each other, we got past that moment. And then, but I never forgot it. And I too had to go through a process in which I realized and then just trusted that every change Elan made to my writing made it better. It doesn't, so we had to, I think along the way, at least with this partner, right, I learned to let go of that pride and identity of authorship that I've carried with me a long, long time, right? So the process, I think has really shifted something inside me permanently.
Wow. To hear you all talk about the humility and the posture of learning, and I think about Parker Palmer's words, when it gets rough, turn to wonder. Like, in other words, okay, what do I have to learn here? Why do I think it ought to be this way? And what is this other person's truth or wisdom that I need to hear? I mean, just that kind of posture. So it reminds me actually about the content of the book, and I've had the opportunity to read it, and it's beautiful, and I can't wait for people to have it in their hands as they think about their own leadership, because the book is all about power and how it can be seen decentered, distributed in a new way in this day and for this season, and particularly, I would say, in faith communities. I mean, we can talk broader, but that's certainly our audience and realm and such. So can you say a word about the book and what it's about? I want to give you an opportunity to do that, certainly, but also I want to dig in a little bit to the dynamics of power and friendship, because I think you all have already spoken to that. So tell us a little bit about the book, and then let's talk about power and friendships.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you briefly about the book. So it's called Picking Up the Pieces: Leadership After Empire. And Kathi and I have spent a lot of time in these last 5 years really thinking a lot about what makes the space for breakthrough ideas, for breakthrough courage, for breakthrough new leaders to step up and emerge. How do we set the table for the ideas and the people and the potential leaders and even the Spirit of God that sits on the margins of our communities, of our societies, of our consciousness, and move them to the center? And as it turns out, one of the key ingredients is, well, if you are, quote unquote, the leader in an institution or a community, you probably are sitting at the center, which means there's not a whole ton of space there. So we think a lot about, even though the book is really about kind of walking away from hierarchical, coercive models of leadership that really look a lot and are shaped a lot like the pyramids of ancient Egypt.
Hence the empire.
That's the empire.
So much more, but yes.
Exactly. It's really like, if you were to imagine, what we're really talking about is like theological geometry here. How can we reposition ourselves such that we have a different angle on what it means to elevate the holiness in our community, to elevate the people around us, different perspectives, and we do so by re-examining the story of Moses's journey to leadership. We often think about Moses as sort of the ideal, quote unquote, leader, the one who was born into it, who had the natural gifts and so on. But, Moses was really somebody who kind of spiraled his way forward and back through learning experiences, through making mistakes, through many failures. But the further away he got from the empire, from the shadows of those pyramids, once he was able to break free from those shadows, his abilities started to emerge, and he started to see the Israelites in a different lens, through a different lens. He started to see his relationship to God in a different lens. And, the Moses who leads them out of Egypt is not the same Moses who gives that final sermon on the footsteps of the promised land. And our hope is that we can invite people to take a similar journey through their own leadership life. Really, I think one of the best parts about our experience writing the book, and I do believe about the reader's experience reading the book too, is going to be hearing about these 6 wonderful leaders who really live into what we call a form of Mosaic leadership. And that's Reverend Eugene Kim, Rabbi Sarah Luria, Rabbi Adam Kligfeld, Reverend Maurice Winley, Father Richard Springer, and Diamond Harges. These are 6 outstanding, amazing people, each of whom deserves their own multi-volume series of books, let alone a standalone book, let alone one chapter in our humble offering. But it was life-changing to sit with and learn from each and every one of them. Yeah. And Kathi, I'll leave it to you to, I think, Lisa, the question about where power shows up in relationship and friendship is really important. Kathi?
Yeah. Let's see. I'll start talking. Let's see if I can get there. Yeah. So one of the things that we got clear on very early in this process, we thought we had this great idea about power sharing as a model for leadership. And we realized very quickly, other people have been talking about this for a long time. We didn't make this up, right? And so it has been sort of a recurrent theme in leadership thought, both faith-filled, among faith-filled people and people totally in the secular arena for a long time. But it's a theory that has trouble sticking. One of the ways we talk about it in the book is that when organizations get stressed about profit or productivity or efficiency, they just snap right back into that pyramid shape with one strong leader at the top who the organization thinks is going to lead them into whatever relief they need. So it seems to us that what our society needs is a sustained experiment with this different model of leadership, really something. And who better to do that than organizations that are not motivated by profit and that have a different sort of essential value proposition than for-profit businesses in a capitalistic culture. So that's religious organizations. And what I think we hope for is that we'll encourage more religious organizations and faith and value-based organizations to experiment with this way, so that we're adding value to what society needs in general in a longer term way. I think it's a new value proposition for the church if we can run this experiment long enough to learn something from it about how to be as leaders. So one of the things that became very clear to me as we were writing, and I think it's in the book as it finally got written, is that my life and leadership, even after I was conscious about wanting to lead in this way, is way more full of stories of failure than it is of success. Right? I think the personal stories that Elan and I put in the book, almost every one of them is saying, yeah, we got this vision, but it's hard. And there are, a million holes to fall in because this old way of leading, thinking that we have to have this power that we hold on to, it's so deep inside of us, just like it was for Moses. And so there is a humility that is it for me. I think even deeper inside of me than it was when we started. And we talk about this, the promised land in the story of the Exodus and in our own experiences of wilderness. The promised land is always a goal. We never actually get there. And maybe that's all it was ever supposed to be. It keeps us moving toward our ultimate values, but we never actually arrive. And that too, in kind of my spiritual life and in my relationships, my friendships, everything else, that the fact that I live in the wilderness and that is where I learn, and that's where I get closer to being the being God might have created me to be, that's just the reality. Right?
What I'm what I'm hearing you say is so I'm not even sure how to say this. What I'm hearing you talk about is something that comes up for us all the time. I mean, over and over again, that it's about formation. Like whether we're talking about the people of Israel in the wilderness who over those 40 years were formed into the people of God. You talk about Moses, he was a different leader and a different human being from that burning bush to that sermon, that message right before crossing into the promised land. He was a different leader and a different human. And I'm even hearing you all talk about just this process of writing together and this friendship. A couple of you have said, I'll never be the same. I mean, you've said a couple of times, I'll never be the same because of this or that. And so you were formed and shaped. And so it makes me think that as we talk about power in relationships and in friendships, it's always there. Like it's always a dynamic. Power is a dynamic in any relationship, in any organization. But you've talked about approaching with humility in a way that opens you up to how you are being formed. Am I hearing that right?
Yes.
It's
And maybe
just,
that is the connection to friendship, Lisa, is that that the friendships form us.
Form us. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about sanctifying friendship, we're not just talking about like blessing them. We're actually saying what happens in friendships is holy. If we open ourselves up to the kind of humility and learning and allowing space for differences but deep commitment and love and honor and respect, then we will be formed. We will be formed 100% of the time.
Yeah.
I think Kathi and I spent a fair amount of time together studying, Moses's last sermon.
Sure.
And, the book of Deuteronomy starts, and he knows he has 5 weeks left to live. And he's been with the Israelites now for 39 years and 11 months. And he knows he's not going any farther. And he has an opportunity to look back, and he has an opportunity to invite them to look ahead. Yeah. And I think what is so remarkable about this is, in our lives, we have very few stopping points where we are able to climb up high enough that we can have a little bit of perspective on where we've been and who we've been and how we've been in relationship to others. And while we still have a little bit of time left on this world, and, all of this that we have, every day that we have is a gift. It's just this, we're in this liminal space and this liminal time, and every season is just a season. But to have had this opportunity to look back on our own leadership lives and the many failures that have come with it, and to come out the other side of it with this incredibly deep friendship that has formed us. We have not formed the friendship has formed us.
Nice.
Has been just a really remarkable gift. And it's not the kind of gift that we, at least in my life and with the pace of things as they are, that kind of vantage point on where I've come from and where I hope to go, to be able to do that looking, with a partner and a teacher and a mentor and a beloved friend has been a once in a lifetime gift.
Beautiful. Beautiful. So we could keep talking forever, and I really would love to dig into each one of those stories of these 6 amazing, beautiful leaders that you've lifted up. But we're going to draw a close. So we're asking all of our guests a final question. And I feel like this has actually been the topic of the whole time together, but we're going to invite you to just distill it down. So, and complete the sentence, you know you're in a holy friendship when.
I will say, I know I'm in a holy friendship when I feel in every interaction like I am so gifted by this person's presence in my life. And what I want for him is only good, right? And so I think, as I hear myself say that, those are the same things that I think sound like love.
Yeah.
So it is an enactment and an evidence in my life of great love.
Nice.
If I just say ditto, is that a cop out? You're going to make me come up with something. How am I going to follow that?
I know.
Well, first I will say ditto.
Ditto.
100%. That is really what it feels like. I know I'm in a holy friendship when it feels like nostalgia while it's happening. Like when I get nostalgic for the conversations that Kathi and I are having as we're having them, for the future we're building, for the book we're writing, for the things we're imagining, the programs we're running, I get nostalgic for them as they are happening, meaning to say that I am both deeply in the moment and experiencing every word as the revelation that it is, and also keenly aware that this moment is just such a precious liminal moment, and I can't wait to relive it someday and look back on this precious, incredible, fleeting one conversation that we had that actually led to another one and actually led to another one. And actually, in Jewish tradition, we're taught that there's 6 things they ask you about in heaven. And just one of them is about how you engaged in learning with a beloved chavruta. And the way it's phrased is, did you learn one thing from another thing and another thing from that thing and another thing from that thing? And that's what allows, I think, what keeps me feeling so keenly aware that what's happening in the moment is deeply precious. And it's going to lead to another thing and another thing and another thing. And just watching that unfold in real time is like witnessing the 8th day of creation happening every time we talk.
Beautiful. Well, I can say that this time with you two has felt like holy ground. It really has. And I am so grateful for your time and for being here and the conversation and the book that you've written and your friendship. I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so
Lisa.
much.
Thank you. Thanks, Elan.
Thank you, Kathi.